Hello and welcome to today's virtual Hinckley Forum. The Hinckley Institute of Politics is a nonpartisan institute at the University of Utah. The Hinckley provides an array of transformative experiences for students through internships, forums, and classes. Hinckley Forums seek to foster public discourse and civil debate on the most current and pressing issues, bringing in local, national, and international thought leaders. Today's forum is presented in partnership with Point B City and Metropolitan Planning. Point B is a University of Utah interdisciplinary student group for those interested in transportation and mobility issues. Point B strives to unite students interested in a diverse range of transportation-related issues, promote student-based research and education in transportation, facilitate community involvement, and support through scholarships, conferences, and mentoring. We would like to thank our media sponsor, KCPW, for recording and rebroadcasting our forums as part of the Hinckley Radio Hour. Today's forum is Transportation Policy in Utah, Where We Are and Where We're Going. Hannah Pack, graduate student and president of Point B City and Metropolitan Planning, will moderate today's discussion. She is joined by panelists Representative Suzanne Harrison of the Utah State Legislature, Senator Ann Milner of the Utah State Legislature, Senator Kathleen Reeby of the Utah State Legislature, and House Majority Whip Mike Schultz of the Utah State Legislature as well. If you have any questions for our panelists, please enter them into the YouTube chat. And with that, I will turn the time over to our moderator.
Awesome, thank you so much, Anne. Thank you all for joining us today to talk about transportation policy in Utah. We are going to have some time at the end for some questions and answers, so please be sure to leave your questions in the chat as we go through this. It's really hard to ignore the growth that Utah is experiencing right now. Latest census data shows that Utah actually was the fastest growing state in the nation over the past decade. Just as our population has changed, so has the way we move. Transportation systems are more than just how we get from point A to point B, but they're also integral to the way that we live and the economy of our communities. Utah legislators have not been blind to this. They've been keenly aware of these changes and have adopted several innovative policies to help manage our growth. So today I'm joined by a really awesome panel, and I really want to take time to discuss some of these policies that have passed to establish where we are today and give an idea of where we're heading in the future. So for this first question, I just want to open it up to all of our panelists. I'm just curious what you think the most transformative policy we've passed or transportation changes that we've had in the past 25 years, and why they've been so transformative in your mind. Anyone can start, or I can pick on someone too. Senator Milner.
I'm going to start. So I think what's really transformative is the fact that Utah has really leaned into transit. And for a state our size, with a population our size, that's probably kind of, even though we are not as densely populated as some places that have robust transit systems, I think we're thinking to the future, and I think that's really important because it's a lot easier to do a transit system early on in your development as a state, as opposed to when you have a really dense population growth and it gets harder to figure out and buy the property, et cetera, to be able to do that. So I think we've been really thoughtful in terms of thinking long-term about a transit system that can work and accommodate many of the needs in our state. And all of us know that it's a combination of getting people around. And in some places, we can't build enough roads. We've got to find a way to help people use transit. And for me, one of the things we did this time that I think is extremely important is to begin the process of double tracking. I had the opportunity to live back east for a while, and I love public transportation. I loved the subway and train system in the Philadelphia area where I lived. But I didn't love getting on one that was what we called a puddle jumper, meaning that it stopped at every little place along the way. I wanted an express. I wanted to be able to travel much more quickly from one spot to the other. Now there's a place for ones that stop every place, but when you're trying to cover like Ogden to Salt Lake, being able to do that, now you can do it quickly, and it's not going to take you twice as much time. to get to where you want to go to in Salt Lake, I think is important. So I think that was a really important step forward for us. And I think people are going to expect that in the future and in order to accommodate their needs. And at the end of the day, it's a long-term investment. It's an investment that it will take decades to pay that back. But it will pay us back in roads that we won't have to build, and air quality that will be improved, and the overall quality of life along the Wasatch Front. So I'm grateful for those who are willing to kind of take the step forward and do that, and that we've been able to continue to move that forward now.
Hi, I'm ready to jump in. I am excited about the transportation non-necessities that we might be having in the near future. With this latest pandemic, we've seen the internet and how we've expanded our internet tremendously with the CARES Act and some of our federal funding, and we've really worked hard to make sure that we have a robust internet. This has changed the face of our housing, and it's also changed the face of our office buildings. So Senator Harper ran a bill that was trying to create like community dwellings around our transit. And so that was exciting to see that we were actually trying to put both of those together. I'm from the East Coast, and we definitely have a different vision here. So from the East Coast, we can't really expand because we are so built up. And so where I represent is up in the Cottonwood Canyons area, and we're dealing with unique transportation issues there. Because we have, the mountain corridor, and we're trying not to bring many people there. So we're trying to come up with other options of like rapid bus and stuff like that. So I think some of the things that we're looking for is actually trying to expand our business and our housings and our business opportunities into our rural areas with hubs and different kinds of modes of transportation. We've also thought about the last mile a lot, being from the East Coast. The train was a mile away, but you couldn't park your car at the train station. So the last mile was always an issue. So I think we've been thoughtful about the last mile, and we've also been thoughtful about how we can expand our business opportunities into the rural areas using the internet, hubs, and different options like that. So in Utah, we've been so forward thinking about so much, and this pandemic actually made us change our plans sometimes and also look to other opportunities. So I'm excited about the future.
Yeah, and just interesting, just to kind of add on, she's talking about transit-oriented development and has lived it, right? The most valuable real estate, if you've lived back east along transit systems, is where the stations are. And that's because everybody, businesses want to be there because that's where all the people are. And people want to live near there because they really don't want to have to drive and try to figure out how to park in order to be able to take the train. And so we're still working through that here. I think we understand philosophically that transit-oriented development is really important, and it needs to be multi-use. And we ought to be thoughtful about how we develop it, because we can be thoughtful. It doesn't just have to kind of happen on its own. On the other hand, our kind of way of life and culture is adjusting to that, and how people see that. And I think that will come. As I watch younger people kind of come back to the city, I think they will think about transit-oriented development, et cetera. So I think that will come over time, but we're really fortunate that we get to design it. Now we just have to help people really kind of enjoy it and capture the possibilities.
Yeah, and I agree with what the senators have said. I think we really have been at the forefront of having a unified transportation plan and looking to the future, and certainly public transit has to be part of that solution as we grow. And we have put significant investment in that. One of the things I'm really excited about is sometimes in the past, there's been a little bit of, our road maintenance and construction has had significantly more investment than transit. And this year with Senate Representative Schultz's bill, there was significant money put towards transit, which I think is such a positive for our air quality and for helping address our future growth and getting people where they need to go in an efficient way. We have to start thinking about, you know, different modes, whether that's active transportation and encouraging more bicycle and pedestrian friendly ways, these, you know, getting people closer to living closer to where they work is also part of the solution. And we're doing a lot right in that regard. I also really agree with what Senator Reeby mentioned about Utah really addressing some of these issues of broadband internet. I think that is becoming as important as electricity or plumbing to your home. We have to give every Utahn an opportunity to access these, you know, potential job opportunities, and that having an effective internet connection is really key to educational and economic opportunities. And Utah's doing so much right on that front.
Yeah, thank you all. I definitely agree. I like that you brought up, including Senator Reeby, the rural communities in this. That's something I also questioned was how do you balance the interests of, a lot of times we think of public transit, we think of it serving urban areas, but how do you consider the needs of rural communities with the needs of urban communities when you're funding something like transportation? And anyone can answer this one.
So can you repeat the question again? I got a little lost with the.
You're good. You had mentioned the need to consider rural communities as well. I think it was when we were talking about more internet, but I was just curious, like when you're making transportation plans, a lot of times we think of public transportation as for urban communities. And how do you think about it in rural communities, serving them?
So the Utah 20-year plan has, you know, thoughts about how we're going to go out into these rural areas. And I would like to see that happen with more public transportation than just freeways, as we've mentioned in the past. We also have our inland port coming, which is actually going to try to bring jobs to those areas using those hubs from the spoke of here in Salt Lake City. And we have all the land that we are, you know, we've thought ahead of time to buy the land and just looked at the possible routes we could take. So I think that the Wasatch Front needs that relief from having all the businesses here. And I think our rural communities would thrive, and that would make the state of Utah thrive. So as how it's going to happen and when, I think we need to start developing those plans a little bit more robustly. But with the amount of money we're putting aside, we definitely are thinking in that direction. And that's kind of all I have to say about that. I don't really know how we can look into the future and make certain plans. And Senator Milner might have some more ideas about that than I do. I'm relatively new to some of these conversations, and it's a lot to learn. But we have a lot of infrastructure in place. We have a lot of research in place. We have a lot of plans in place, which is so different from coming back east when we had everything built and then we had to go back in and fill it all in. I mean, Robert Moses decimated whole entire communities trying to build our highway system there, and I don't see that happening here at such a great rate. And hopefully we can prevent communities from being upset if we do need to expand our highways.
You know, one of the things that Utah's, forward thinking and planning, I do think has been a hallmark, particularly around thinking about transportation planning in the state. And there was a time that, you know, projects used to kind of get prioritized by communities, and it used to be somewhat of a free-for-all at the legislature. But after the Transportation Commission was put in place, I think people have said, let's focus on having a really solid planning effort. Let's balance the needs across the entire state. Let's engage these communities in the process of transportation planning and develop priority listings based on criteria. So it's really based on where the need is, where the growth is going to be, how we're going to accommodate that, et cetera. And I think one of the, like, for example, in this last bill for infrastructure that Representative Schultz sponsored in the House, it was actually focused on those priorities that had already been developed through the transportation process. So criteria-based, priority-based, as opposed to people just kind of coming in with their particular project. And I think that's the, oh, there he is too. I'm talking about you. So I think that it says it, you know, people respect the process and they respect that it's done in the right way and it's really meant to balance the needs across the state. And we always have to be thoughtful about rural versus urban. It's, you know, when you think about roads, we do tend to think Wasatch Front in really significant ways. But we also know that being able to provide access not only for rural communities, they have to have the infrastructure. If we're going to do economic development in those communities, we have to invest in the infrastructure to support the businesses in those areas. If we're going to invest and support access to, you know, our parks. I mean, we have kind of 5 best parks any place in one state, but we've got to make sure that people can get to those parks. We have a tremendous network of state parks that we all like to recreate in, but we have to make sure people can get there. So I think it has to be a thoughtful, balanced process to meet all the needs. And that's really the responsibility, I think, of the Transportation Commission, really trying to take all of those factors and build us a robust plan and prioritize projects for the benefit of the entire state. And Representative Schultz lived by those priorities, and as he thoughtfully put together his infrastructure bill, which I greatly appreciate. It's yours.
Hey, well, I apologize. I'm late, Senator. Yeah, we had some problems with some cows this morning. Anyway, so yeah, happy to participate. I think you did a great job explaining it. And
transportation problems.
Yeah, transportation, the 4-legged kinds with horses and cows. Yeah.
Well, so we've kind of talked about it a little bit already, but the infrastructure spending bill, Representative Schultz, would you like to just kind of briefly explain for the audience what that is? And then there's some topics in that I'd love to discuss with everyone.
Yeah, absolutely. So briefly, it started out as a combination of a large bond coupled with a bunch of one-time money that the state had available. So we found ourselves in a unique position this year with having so much one-time money. And so the question came is, you know, what do we do with that much one-time money? Because it's hard to make ongoing commitments, or you can't make ongoing commitments with state government with one-time money. And so we made the decision as leadership teams and as bodies, both the Senate and the House, to take a large portion of that one-time money and put it into transportation needs all across the state. And so as we did that, and as we looked at you know, the options of bonding, working with the Senate and UDOT, it made sense to lower the bond. We actually increased the amount of one-time money that we put out a little bit, and we were still able to accomplish all of the projects. I think Senator Milner did a great job explaining the Transportation Commission and the process that they go through to make sure that those dollars are being spent wisely across the state and aren't just someone's certain legislators' pet projects. And I think for the most part, we did a good job pulling those things together, and so we were able to accomplish, you know, take some one-time money with a bond and accomplish projects all across the state. And also, you know, one of the things that I'm most proud of with it is it was multimodal transportation. It wasn't just roads. It was front runner, tracks, active transportation. Largest investment made in active transportation in the state's history. And yeah, so I think that's kind of a broad picture of it. I'm happy to dive more into questions and details.
Yeah, I think just from like a public perspective, looking at this, some of the things that I think people were really following was, like you were saying, like electrification and double tracking of the front runner. And then there was also the bus rapid transit in central Utah and a few funding changes. What of these, I think, I just kind of want to talk about some of them and see what the major impact you think that these are going to have on the state. I think the front runner, is kind of the one of the more regional plans here, but yeah, just kind of.
So it's what it is to do full double tracking and electrification of front runner is somewhere in the neighborhood of $1 to $2 billion, and so we weren't able to quite accomplish all of that. So what we did is we did strategic double tracking. And what that will allow is for 15-minute intervals during peak hours between the trains on front runner, as well as allowing express trains to happen. And maybe the express trains are there's only a couple of them during the peak hours, but what that will do is basically, let's use an example. I don't know if this will be exact or not. It depends on what the engineers come back with, but we'll be able to send a nonstop train from Provo to Salt Lake or Ogden to Salt Lake, and shave about 15 to 20 minutes off of the time that it takes to make that commute. And so by doing that, it will, I think, give the opportunity for more people to come and jump on board and take front runner, because I think one of the biggest reasons people don't ride front runner is because it does take so much time, and isn't very isn't quick. It takes longer. You can drive it faster than you can ride the front runner, and so the idea is to cut that down and make it at least comparable, if not faster, to the versus driving it. And then there's a couple other things. S-line on tracks, we extended that. And then also one of the big things is we set up a funding framework to address the Cottonwood Canyons issue. We don't know whether that's what that's going to be yet, or what that's going to look like yet. UDOT's in the process of doing a study between 3 different options. One's a bus rapid transit, the other one is a gondola, and the other one is basically a cog or a tracks line, similar to a tracks line that runs up the Cottonwood Canyons. And so we'll see what that looks like, but we know that's going to be several $100 million to address that either way. And so it's a big issue that's facing our state. And so part of this infrastructure spending bill set up a funding mechanism to fund that once we determine the best option there.
Hi, this is I would like to address the Cottonwood Canyons issue. We have $5 million in this bill to do an EIS study, and I think that's going to be really important. We have been studying Little Cottonwood Canyon since 1970. I used to live up there, and when I started researching this problem, I realized that we talked about snow sheds in 1990, and that didn't really work out. And then we talked about moving the road to the other side so that we wouldn't have to deal with the avalanches. Just this last month, we had 200 avalanches in like 2 days. And so trying to mitigate that kind of traffic problem is Herculean. So the gondola and the train and the buses are still a big conversation. Another question that somebody was mentioning is that the automobile-orientated societies is one of the questions that Representative Schultz brought up. This weekend, I'm going to take a train to San Francisco with my daughter. It's going to take us 18 hours instead of 10-hour drive, and it's going to cost us 5 times as much instead of flying, but we really wanted to take this train ride. So this is a really big concern. In New York, we have express trains. Depending on where you lived, you could just take a train from New York City right to your stop. And that did save like a half an hour. And that made all the difference in the world, because you don't want to be on a train longer than you would be in a car. So trying to come up with the money that makes it cheaper to actually buy the ticket to be on the train, and then also to reduce the time, those have to balance out so that you actually want to be invested in this situation. as far as Cottonwood Canyon, that's still the same problem. It ties it all back up together. I live right at the mouth of Little Cottonwood Canyon, and when I go skiing on a Saturday or Sunday, it can take me 2 hours. 10 miles, 2 hours. And then if you're on a bus, it actually takes you longer because you have to go through all the different stops. So all of these questions replicate themselves in every solution and every question. So no matter where we're looking, we're always trying to find the balance of how do we get the people into the buses, how do we make them cost effective, and how do we make them time effective? Because the other part about it is, what's the point of moving all of my equipment and myself from one mode of transportation to another when that's the other part of it. If we have a railroad system and it stops at the mouth of the canyon, you have to get off a railroad onto a bus. No one's going to want to do that because it's a lot of equipment to be carrying. So it's always the same questions and trying to come up with solutions that fit those balances. So.
I just wanted to chime in. I want to commend Representative Schultz. I think that transportation bill is a game changer, and I really commend him for having funding in there for the different modes of transportation. It's not just a one size fits all approach. I think that electrification of front runner and addressing how long it takes for people to get where they need to go is key to solving our transportation issues into the future. I think the other key to this is listening to those folks in those communities. That bus rapid transit that Utah Valley has between Front Runner and Utah Valley University has been a game changer. The fact that it addresses that last mile or two of getting people where they need to go in a way that really makes sense. The ridership on that route has gone through the roof. And I think those key aspects of listening to communities, what they need, and whether that's urban or rural, and then addressing those funding streams so that there are investments in multiple routes of transportation are going to be key for economic development and air quality.
Yeah, thank you. So this was a really big bill. It had a lot of projects in it, but I'm just curious if there's anything that you feel just got away that you really wanted to address this session that you weren't able to, what that was and how it kind of informs what you're going to do in your upcoming interim session for this year.
So I'm probably going to take this in a little different direction than you meant it.
That is good.
But I do think we do have a challenge going forward. And that's going to be, this is kind of an interesting time. We have this kind of one-time money that we can help supplement transportation projects beyond what we have in the fuel tax fund, but beyond what we have in the TIF fund. And the TIF fund is really comes from sales tax on cars. So that's what we've used. And with inflation, combination of the fact that we have more fuel efficient cars, we have more electric cars, et cetera, it means we have almost fewer resources to deal with our transportation needs on an ongoing basis. So one of the issues will be, how do we fund transportation projects in the future? And people are talking about options like miles driven. They're doing pilot projects around those things. They've talked about just using registration fees. They've talked about a lot of different things, but that all changes our mindset about how we fund projects. Yet we're not keeping up with the need and demand, and we're not going to, simply because we don't have an inflation factor on our fuel tax. We have more efficient vehicles, which means you're buying less gas, paying less tax per mile that you're driving now. And we have to we're going to have to think through, how do we set a framework in place for the future? So that's not done yet. And that's a hard one. It's really hard. We've talked about it for a while. We have groups studying it. We're trying some pilot projects, but it's still going to be a really significant project going forward.
And I'll jump into really quick and pick up on a couple things that Senator Milner said. But first, just to address the question, I think, you know, in the bill and what did we get everything we accomplished done? I'll just say this: we will never ever get everything that we want accomplished done. We have more needs across the state than we have actual revenues, even in a year where we have a lot of extra revenues, like we did this year. There's still so many needs out there that that just outpace the amount of dollars that we have. And so that being said, if you would have asked me that, I would have, you know, at the first of the session that we were able to get as much done as we got done, I would have said that we wouldn't have been able to get that much done. So I'm really happy with as much as we've got done in that transportation bill. And I'm glad that we were all able to come together. I don't think it had a single no vote on it, you know, between the House, the Senate, and the governor's office was certainly supportive of it. But Senator Milner did mention a huge problem we have going forward. We have, you know, GM came out within the last few months and mentioned and said that they will not be producing any fuel vehicles, gasoline vehicles by 2035. There's, you know, other car makers that are saying 2035 is what GM said. There's other car makers that have said, you know, 2025, 2030, they're going to be all electric. And so we do have a big problem facing the state. In the mid 90s, the fuel tax paid for 90-something%, 95% of our roads. Today, it's about 25%. And so it's not a problem that's just hit us overnight. It's been coming at us for decades, and but it's about to get even worse. I'm a little bit skeptical on the vehicle miles driven. I'm certainly open to that. I think that it would be, if it works, it's a good resource and a good way to do it. My concern is the amount of cost. I look at it from a business perspective, and to collect the taxes on that, and to actually determine how many miles a person drove, and is the cost to collect that dollar amount is going to be a very large number. And at the end of the day, I think the citizens of the state would pay less overall if we just kept it simple and made it a registration fee overall. But, you know, hey, I'm open to it, and it'll be interesting to see what UDOT comes back with on their study. But it's likely a combination of both registration fees and vehicle miles driven. But we do have to do something to address the concerns.
All of this, I mean, and particularly because the backdrop of this is our population is going to be doubling in the next 40 years. And so we have to figure that out, because this means that we're not going to keep up with our transportation needs unless we figure out how to build a sustainable funding source for them over time.
Yeah, I really agree. I think this is one of the big challenges that lie ahead. And luckily, we have really bright and thoughtful people here in this state with expertise and can give some input into how do we address this long term in a way that doesn't penalize any particular user, whether it's a rural person who tends to have to drive further to get where they need to go and may have, you know, there's socioeconomic issues with this, and also air quality issues. How do we fund our transportation system in a way that also, you know, prioritizes the needs of people in different communities and our air quality challenges?
And I'd like to add that we are looking at Utah is 35th by some measures in generating electricity. And so as we start to move towards more electricity, we have to start thinking about how we're going to be generating that electricity. And it seems like we're going to be moving away from some of our traditional energy sources and moving onto that. So that's like another issue that we're going to have to start addressing as well. I mean, we want to make that transition smoothly, and we want to have the infrastructure in place. I think that we are not siloed in our solutions, which I think is really exciting, that we all work together to try to figure out how one impacts the next. And that's fantastic. We've also leveraged Utah's AAA bond rating so that we were able to leverage all this, leverage all these bonds that we are using. So there are so many great things that we have in place here in Utah. And some of the solutions that I struggle with is our housing situation. We actually increased our housing budget by 73%. So as we're moving and we're doubling in our population and we're doubling the amount of people that want to live here, because we are such a great state, we have a AAA bond rating, and we do balance the budget every year, we have these opportunities. But now with the ability to move around the state, we're also creating a situation where people aren't having the same opportunities to buy houses or to rent houses or to have a place that they can call their own. So that is something that we've looked at as well. With our transportation, we've actually increased that budget. So like I said, it's multi-pronged, and we're all looking at it from various different angles. But by creating more electricity, we're also looking at our air quality. And by trying to create more public transportation, we are looking at air quality. And then creating the transit development hubs, we're also looking at housing and businesses. So it is exciting to see it being built up. I just did a lesson with my kids in Minecraft. And so it's like we're like doing a little Minecraft experiment here, and we're trying to use all the variables we have. So I also want to commend Representative Schultz for coming up with, facilitating this bill, because it's going to be a game changer. And what a unique time during this pandemic when actually everybody's starting to figure out that they don't have to come to a rural area, a city to actually work. We can actually telecommute at a higher level. And so it seems like a great opportunity all around.
I think that's a perfect segue into what I wanted to talk about next, which was housing, and how this pandemic is going to change where people think about living. We've already talked about like needing internet infrastructure, needing to accommodate housing, but how do you think that Utah is planning on doing all of this in a sustainable way? I think a lot of times you think about sustainability as like it's got to be green, but just something that is good for like the economy, good for society, good for longevity. Questions?
So I do think that this pandemic has had some silver linings. And one of those has been our ability to collectively learn technology skills that allow us to do something like this today, or a legislative session in hybrid, which if you had asked us 12 months ago, perhaps, if we were going to do that, we would have said no, right? But we've collectively learned these skills that allow people to think differently about how they work, about how they access healthcare, about how they learn. And I think that means if we want to facilitate the potential of that, particularly, we've got along, in particular our rural areas, but even in our urban core areas, we have kind of these kind of islands in terms of thinking about internet access, because the key infrastructure component to that, as others have said, is access to the internet. And we have to be able to provide that, and not at slow speeds. It's got to be faster. If you're going to be able to facilitate multiple people on doing the work they need to be done, it's got to be much faster than the federal standard, which is really slow. Something like 25 megs versus being able to get much more robust speed. So investing in broadband access, getting fiber out throughout our rural areas, thinking about last mile connections, even on with Broadband is going to be important because it's not just getting the fiber in, it's also getting it out into a community. And we've done a really good job in Utah of getting it to schools. But this taught us that it's not just about getting it to schools, it's about getting it to kids at home in their communities. It's about getting it to people who need to be able to work from home. And it's about providing access. If you want telemedicine to work, it can't just be in the hospital or in the physician's office. It's got to be accessible to the individuals in the community as well. So I think we have to think about it like electricity, and we have to build kind of a robust internet infrastructure across the state. And if we do that, it allows people, first of all, to stay in rural communities and be able to work, learn, and access healthcare, which are always the issues for rural communities. But it would also allow more people to do that because of the potential of remote working. And there are lots of people who would like to have lifestyles in smaller communities, but want access to good jobs. And I think we now have the infrastructure. Well, we don't have the infrastructure yet, but I think we have the vision of what this could be. Now we just have to make sure that we build the infrastructure, just like we think about roads. We've got to think about this infrastructure for the internet.
Absolutely. And I would also add, I was very excited about the investment that we made this year in the legislature of over $50 million for affordable housing and addressing homelessness. And that was augmented by the generosity of multiple charitable and local organizations to the tune of adding over $750 million of additional charitable donations towards addressing housing affordability. And I'm just so grateful to those groups and individuals that donated. And I think this combined effort of state and local charitable donations is going to make a huge difference in this incredible challenge.
Some of the other things that have actually benefited from the change that we've seen in this pandemic was that, our court systems, we went digital on those. A lot of our state programs all went virtual. And so that was really like a big change for a lot of people. And as we come out of this pandemic, we are realizing that that doesn't have to change. We can still use these technologies. I think it's really neat as a school teacher that schools were kind of the first group that kind of had to go virtual really fast. And we actually helped the whole state through the school system by creating opportunities at school school at home. And so, somebody that had to go to court but didn't have a hotspot now can go to court with their hotspot from school, So it was, I'm amazed at how awesome it all kind of came together. And we all are looking at it and saying, how can we use this to make a betterment? And so we have telehealth, we have mental health that can be through the internet, court systems, libraries, DMV. Everything now can be, we figured it out, and it's not working seamlessly, but it is working pretty well. And so hopefully we can maybe get some of those cars off the road, keep people in their rural areas instead of driving all the way through. And just, we've been forced to be flexible, and hopefully we can maximize on that flexibility and carry it with us into the future, because it has been incredible. And the people of Utah stepped up to the plate, and it really was exciting to watch, and it still is.
So I've spent the last 25 years in business in housing. It's something that I know a lot about. I'm very passionate about this. There's several issues that's causing the housing prices to rise right now. But the biggest one is simple economics. It's supply and demand. If you go back 12 years, 13 years ago in 2008, the housing crisis, we spent 4 or 5 years building too many houses. And there got to be too many houses on the market. Banks were lending to to people they probably shouldn't have, or definitely shouldn't have. But anyways, you saw too many houses on the market at that point in time, and you had a correction, and housing prices over a couple year period dropped 25 to 30%. Well, contrast that to today, and over the last 2 to 3 years, housing prices have increased 25 to 30%. And if you look at, since we were, where we were at in 2008, 2009 to where we're at today, there's one city that we're building in, a very similar townhouse. We're charging 3 times the amount for that townhouse today than we were in 2008. And so the biggest reason is there's a housing shortage. There's more demand than there is available housing, and that's why we're seeing it today. There's a lot of reasons for that shortage, but the biggest one is the local governments. We have, I'm not going to name the cities, but I know of 2 cities who just in the last year went and said no more high density. In fact, we're only going to approve acre lots in our cities from here on out. And the city, one of those cities that I just gave that example on, in regards to the townhouse costing 3 times as much today as it did 13 years ago, they're actually one of those cities that made that choice and to go into only acre lots, approving acre lots. And so we have one of the last projects left in that city, and it's amazing, and it's sad, honestly, to our kids and our grandkids who are trying to be out there buying houses. But that's where a lot of the problem lies within the local governments. I want to commend Salt Lake City. They've done it right over the last several years. And if you look at housing costs, rental costs, and I'm going to speak more specifically towards rental costs. Over the last 4 or 5 years, Salt Lake City has built more apartments than any other city. In fact, if you almost, it's left roughly 30 to 50% of the apartments that have been built along the Wasatch Front have been built inside Salt Lake City. Well, again, come back to supply and demand. They've seen housing, the cost of rent in Salt Lake City has grown at a much slower rate than other parts of the state, than any other part of the Wasatch Front. And so that right there shows you that if we can increase the supply, it'll moderate the prices. We have to be careful with just throwing money at it as a state. It's good for landlords and different people by putting money, helping people pay rent, but it also causes prices to go up even higher for everybody else. So if the money's going towards creating more inventory, then that's a good thing. But if it's going to just help pay rent, well, that actually, in some circumstances that's good, but it also compounds the problem and puts more money into a system that isn't meeting the current demands. And so that actually compounds the problems and makes prices go up higher even faster. And so it's a balancing act. I think Representative Ward did a great job running a bill, ADUs, where saying that cities had to allow people to rent out their basements if they wanted to. Luckily, we were able to get that passed, and the governor signed it, and that's now into law. That's a good thing as we see smaller households, people not having as many kids. So much of our housing stock across the state has been built for, 6, 7, 8 6, 7, 8 people per household. But yet our average right now is 3 people per household. And so if they can rent out their basements to a newlywed or someone that just got divorced or to a family or whatever it may be, that's one of the best things that we can do to increase housing supply in the state. And so I think his bill will have a significant impact on housing once it takes effect. And so we're excited about that. But there's other things we can do and certainly need to do. But I think really local government holds the keys to this. And Senator Milner brought up a good point. It's not going to be able to happen just along the Wasatch Front. Rural Utah is going to have to play a part in.
Yeah. Thank you. So we've got a little less than 10 minutes left here. So I did just want to get to a few of these questions from the audience. First one I want to look at, let's see, when they say when Banker Highway was put in, they had to erect wall buffers to muffle traffic noise. How can we even-handedly compromise transportation progress with urban growth so neither is unduly impacted?
So I'll take a stab at that. I can't talk about Bangor specifically, but I can talk about project on 89. And even though that kind of limited access structure for expanding 89 to really facilitate transportation between Ogden and Salt Lake had been something that had been planned for at least 20 years. When it really came time, it was closed, there was lots of concern by some of the folks who lived in that area. And, here's where I think UDOT working with people in communities does a really great job. They listened. They began to hear some of the concerns, and then they got creative about the design of 89. And instead of thinking all about overpasses, they began to think about underpasses as well as overpasses. And they began to think differently and creatively, trying to be sensitive to needs. And yes, we're going to have sound barriers, and we're going to be doing a lot of those kinds of things as well. But I think we try to balance the need for transportation, and it really does need to be transportation that works and access to highways that work, with concerns with neighborhoods, and try to find as best we can the right balance. And I think UDOT works really hard at that and very thoughtfully.
So I'd like to take a stab at that one as well, being at the mouth of Little Cottonwood Canyon. I think some of our issues actually arise from the flow of traffic. And if our flow isn't moving at an acceptable rate and we have traffic that's stagnant, that creates some of the problems. So the overpasses and underpasses are definitely something that we need to think about when impacting our neighborhoods. Then we have the noise. Mikkel's bill about Moab and those vehicles. That's not just those types of over-the-road vehicles, off-road vehicles, sorry. It's also motorcycles and cars. And then also last year we ran a bill with pollution, with big trucks that could actually blow those big black puffs of smoke. I think that unfortunately, sometimes people don't realize the impact of their recreational vehicles or their vehicles on the people around them. And no one wants to regulate everyone and have a nanny state, of whose car you can drive and how loud it should be. But I think these are things we're going to have to think about in the upcoming future. We can't have cars that excessively pollute us with noise or pollution. So I think that might have to be a solution we're going to have to look at as a more overreaching set of legislation. We are actually moving to a situation where we have more telecommuting. So hopefully we can look to different solutions that we didn't always see in the past. Right now, as they're starting to build up Little Cottonwood Canyon, we don't have the capacity to build a bigger road up there. The canyon's only so wide. So sometimes we're forced into different situations, but that lack of latitude might have us think outside the box and start thinking of other solutions like the gondola or the train. But every situation is unique, and Bangor is unique because, and probably 89 is that the neighborhoods are already established. So how do you protect those people that are there and then also move forward? It would be nice if we could stop, but no one ever does. So a lot of different problems with lots of different solutions, and it's nice to see that we're trying to explore as many as possible.
Yeah, thank you.
I'll jump in really quick. I have just couple thoughts on this. Then this is coming from a guy who's preferred mode of transportation a lot of days has 4 legs. So when you hear him start talking about we need to look at things besides just roads, because not everybody wants to see a 4-lane road pop up in their backyard. In fact, nobody wants to see that. And so unfortunately, sometimes we have to do that. But if we can look at other modes of transportation, and that's where I became such a strong component of transit and multimodal transportation. Even though I don't find myself on that very often, I'm a firm believer in it. And when I became chair of transportation, I think it was 4 or 5 years ago, Carlos Braceras, who's the director of UDOT, stared me in the face and said, "Representative Schultz, we cannot build enough roads to meet the needs of our growing population. And so we have to look at other modes of transportation. So the sooner we can do that, I think the better off we're going to be, not just from an air quality standpoint, but also a quality of life standpoint. And so we have to think multimodal forms of transportation. Another thing we have to think about is density and zoning, and how we, if we can create one of the biggest things we can do is if we can create around the multimodal transportation hubs, housing, jobs, and everything else, so that people don't have to own vehicles, so they can walk to work, or they can hop on the train and go to work, or so that they're close to their jobs, or telecommunicating. Those are other things that we can do to help to look to solve the problems.
Yeah, I feel like that's really encouraging to hear, especially as we keep growing and, life keeps throwing curveballs like the pandemic that sort of just uproots the way we do things, and we don't, know. So, but I definitely want to thank everyone for joining today. Thank you to all the legislators here. Thank you to everyone at Hinckley Institute who helped put all of this together. And definitely thank all the audience for being here today and just taking a minute of this gorgeous day just to kind of hang out and talk transportation. So thank you all so much for coming.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, you guys.
Appreciate it.
Later.